Hello and thank you for watching this short video on YouTube. For those who don't know me, well, I'm Brother Sean. I'm an enclosed lay monastic who embraces all faiths and none as an interfaith Franciscan. And I belong to an amazing spiritual community, a cyber community of men and women of different faiths who lived the spiritual life in accordance with their own spiritual teachers from their own home. This morning I've just come in and I was out with the dogs having a little walk in the shade because it's so hot here, and I got a strong feeling in my heart to come home and sit in front of the camera and ask a question. What does the Lord Buddha, Mia Baba, Rumi, Martin Luther King, Hitler, Saddam Hussein, Teresa of Calcutta, and the present Pope Francis have in common with you? Challenge. To put it simply, each one, like you and me, we are a child of God. Not of religion, but a child of love. And each one of us were called by name, not as a group, but by our name, to come and surrender our hearts to a loving Father, Mother God. When I was 16, back in 1966, many years ago, on the 6th of June, I entered a Catholic nursing monastery because out of the blue I was going out with this lovely girl from Dublin, and one evening we went to see The Nun's Story together with Audrey Hepburn. You may have seen it, and all of a sudden my heart was exploding. I wanted to be a monk in Africa, a nursing monk. But having left school at 11 to rear a young family when my mum was very ill, I didn't have the formal qualifications to gain entry into nursing. But God had a plan for me. And out of the blue, something I'd never done, I went and bought a Sunday paper in Dublin. And at the very back there was an advert. Are you interested in testing your vocation as a nursing monk? I'd never seen it before because my father bought the same paper every Sunday. And I'd never seen it again, so I replied. And within 6 weeks, my mum and dad were driving me down to a Southern Ireland in a place called Cove, County Cork, many miles away. And though it was sad leaving home, my heart knew it was the right thing. So what does the Lord Buddha have in common with you? Well, he answered the call of his heart. He followed his gut feeling to go and sit by the Bodhi tree and there wait patiently for enlightenment. So too with Rumi and Osho and Mia Baba, with Francis of Assisi, even Sri Chimoy, all the many great spiritual teachers. They honored their heart. They surrendered their heart. They surrendered their will. And in the silence and stillness of their space, they heard the voice of the Supreme calling them to agape, to a spiritual feast. And Hitler, Mussolini, Pol Pot, Saddam Hussein, each of those, though they were tyrants, like Mugabe today in South Africa, they are each a child of God. But they clearly chose not to listen to that voice and to follow their ego, their mind. But each one were wounded souls. Hitler was wounded, tormented as a child. Saddam Hussein was bullied and abused by his father. So you can understand that in adult life they would loop and become the abuser themselves. But they had a choice. You have a choice whether to stay stuck in your ego or surrender your heart and listen to your heart. As a Celtic interfaith Franciscan, I live a much different life to the life I lived in the fast lane as a senior nurse in palliative care and globetrotting, running retreats, especially in Egypt by the Red Sea, which I miss terribly, but I followed my heart. And in 2007, when I came back from Egypt, I contracted a virus that left me temporarily paralyzed for 6 months. But that wasn't a punishment from God. That was a means to an end to get me to be still and to face those fears I had. I knew I had to return to God. I knew that I had to surrender my heart completely. But I used every excuse in the book to run away. Oh yes, I ran away. Because as a young nursing monk in the Catholic Church, I survived the regime for 8 years. And like another 200 and odd young monks, we couldn't cope anymore with the lack of Christianity, the lack of compassion. And I left halfway through my nurse training. And yes, it was a lonely path, and it took me 12 years in counselling to recover from that negative mindset that I was a sinner and full of guilt for daring to leave God's service. But in 2007, I had to rely on a lot of people to help me dress, wash. But God wanted me to listen to my heart. And on the 7th, 8th of December 2007, I remember kneeling down and saying, okay, God, you've won. I give in. I surrender my heart to love. But what stopped me doing that was when I knew in here that God wanted me to return to a loving relationship, my mind, my fears were that he wanted me to go back into a Catholic monastery, and I freaked. Because prisoners today have a far easier life than we did as monks, because we had no life. We weren't a person, we were a number. And that's an awful thing to admit to, but I love my brothers, I pray for them. But I thank God I'm out of that looking in now, rather than on the inside looking out. So I convinced myself, yes, that that's what God wanted of me. But I had a rude awakening at the beginning of December when he said, I've never asked you to return to that. Many of them have lost their way because they're more focused on the ritual and the rule, and their heart is stifled with fear. I want you to embrace me here where you are right now. And then of course in 2008, when I was guided in my heart whilst at a wedding, a family wedding in Florence, to take the long journey down to Assisi, that's when my real journey began. And I'm not one for hearing voices or seeing visions. As a nurse for many years, I trained in the old system of coming to the patient and their problem through my senses, not my qualifications. So my journey with God is hands-on, it's not academic. And there at the tomb of St. Francis in Assisi, I wondered, what on God's earth am I doing here? And I sat, and all of a sudden, within 20 minutes, I started crying. And I couldn't stop crying. And there were tears of release, of many years of deep unhappiness, of denying myself freedom from all that religious guilt and fear. And then I heard in my heart that inner voice, go and embrace all faiths. You have prayed all your life, not just for Christian unity, but you've prayed for the unity of all faiths, that they become one. Well, I sense Jesus and St. Francis of Assisi ask me to go out and embrace all faiths, not to establish a religion or a cult, but a loving family called the Teo community of St. Francis, whose spirituality would be underpinned by Celtic interfaith Franciscan spirituality, where we come to God through nature and the animal kingdom. Our cathedral is the landscape. The choir, the choristers are the birds that sing the praises of God. So you see, I live a simple life, and I've never been as happy. I own nothing, but I have everything. When I took the vow of providence, I depended totally, completely on a loving Father, Mother, God to meet my needs. Yes, to meeting all my needs. And to give you an example, one day I had a craving for a coffee cake, homemade coffee cake, so I thought I'll make one. But then I realized I sold the last half dozen of the hen's eggs, so I couldn't. And I just said, okay, so be it. But in the afternoon I had reason to go into the garage and get something from the freezer, and woe, behold, on top of the freezer was a package. And it was a homemade coffee cake from my neighbor Pauline. And it was beautiful. So everything that we need will be provided for. But coming back to Saddam Hussein, Hitler, Mia Baba, and the present Pope in Rome, we all have something in common. We're a child of God. We each were called by name to surrender our heart and embrace the divine. And though everybody is asked, not everybody accepts. Many walk away even when they're called. I've seen it in our community. Many join with great enthusiasm, all singing, all swinging and dancing, full of joy. And then they procrastinate, they go back to their head, they become analytical, they debate everything that the heart guides them to do in prayer, and they end up losing the plot. They end up becoming argumentative. They end up behind closed doors, calling their brothers and sisters who don't meet with their approval, as is happening in Buddhism, in Christianity, in Judaism, where you have a human family who gather together as a community. You will have human failings. But what you and I have in common with the Lord Buddha, with Rumi, Francis of Assisi, even Jesus Christ, we have been called by name. And that is a wonderful gift. You have that gift. I've been given that gift too. And after many years of struggling and falling over many suitcases and handbags, and having been temporarily paralyzed, that was God's way, the hound of heaven, of getting me to come back and listen to my heart. Is that where you are today? Because if you are, name it, bless it, release it, and then surrender to love. I give you my word, you have no regrets. You will not regret the decision to surrender your heart to a loving God. Your God will not punish you. Your God cries out to you each day to embrace you in your shadows, in your darkness, in your failings, your misery and your depression. And all it takes is a simple yes. Yes, God, I am willing to walk with you, to cross the bridge into life eternal by honoring your voice, your word in my heart. Or I'm not interested and walk away. And whatever your decision, be it positive or negative, you will still be loved. And that's why so many today are living the spiritual paths without all the dogma and ritual like me. I prefer my spiritual journey to be simple. I don't want the smells, the bells and the ancient rituals that entrap the soul. I've done all that. I prefer it to be simple, to sit in our monastery garden, to smell the flowers, to listen to the birds sing, and allow my heart receive the words of my God. So yes, you do have a lot in common with all the great men and women of the world. You're a child of God, and you are loved. I leave you a reflection, a beautiful reflection which we were guided to read at our midnight vigil last night. I am you. You are born of the same light that I am. You come from the source and can never be separate from it. Which part of air and breathing is not I? I ask the Lord God to bless you. I may not know you, but the God who created you, who formed you in your mother's womb, knows you by name. So I will ask the Father, Mother God, in the name of the Cosmic Christ, to really touch you and to bring you back to your heart, your teacher. Namaste. Shalom. Inshallah Paxet Bonum. Shanti. Solo di Caritas. Peace.